Hi everyone, my name is Lauren Ashman and I'm a part of the recruiting team here at Emerson. I'm thrilled to have a great group of people with me today. We have 4 individuals who recently joined Emerson as a part of our Engineers in Leadership program. Give a little wave as I read off each of your names. Brittany Becker joining us from Columbus, Ohio.
Hello.
Bill McCormick joining us from Austin, Texas.
Hi, everyone.
Elizabeth Morris also joining us from Austin.
Hey.
And Katie Cook joining us from Singapore.
Hi.
We also have one very special guest who's been with Emerson for close to 40 years, Charlie Peters, Emerson's Senior Executive Vice President. Hi, Charlie.
Hi, Lauren. Hello, everyone.
We want to give these newly minted employees the chance to pick Charlie's brain on a variety of subjects. I'll let the engineers and leadership participants have the floor.
Charlie, you recently tweeted something about navigating multiple cultures and how the next era of successful managers are going to be, much more successful at that. How much of a factor do you think language barriers come into that? Because, with the advancement of sort of the BRIC industries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, obviously that's less of a westernized culture, and that may present barriers in terms of like language and cultural barriers.
Wow. That's a great question, and one that I hadn't really thought about. It actually, I'm going to probably give a little longer answer here, because it reminds me of the fact that I had the fortune during my career of traveling and engaging in foreign lands. And, oftentimes people say, to build a career, do you need to live internationally? And unfortunately, I never lived outside of the United States. Fortunately, I traveled about 1 week out of every month for about 30 straight years. So, I actually think that I benefited dramatically from engaging in all these cultures around the world. And the second piece of my answer is I never learned another language other than English. So I had to navigate these cultures with English as my base language. And if we had this session in the 90s, I would have said, one piece of capability that I think you need to develop is the ability to live and work in a location, in a geography where you don't know the language. And so, where you go into a factory and there's very little English, or, learn to have an impact and go ahead and kind of prosecute the business that you have to do. So that would have been my advice of the 90s, is learn to go into a culture or a country where you're not capable of speaking the language, and learn to navigate that. That comes out of, in the late 70s and early 80s, I had to spend a week in Holland. For the first year I worked after business school, I had to spend 1 week in Holland for about every month for the first 2 years. And wow, they spoke a little bit of English, but mostly I had to learn how to get along listening to Dutch and kind of trying to figure out what people were saying through body language and everything. So if you fast forward to today, I became fascinated in the last 10 years with the word culture, and I actually think that's the difference between your careers as a millennial in this era and mine. I think now you're going to have to work in many, many different cultures around the world. And just to bring my answer together, I think it was that very act of having to learn how to work in a culture where everybody spoke a different language and you didn't have the language capability, learning how to go about doing my business there, that really made me very sensitive to cultures, which at the end of the day is really the key to unlocking a lot of these lessons, because each culture has things that they do well and has voids. And when you start to piece all that together and learn how to operate in these different cultures and learn the lessons that each culture has, that's when you suddenly become a more whole person and a more effective manager, a more empathetic person, a more understanding person. and a much richer individual and a much more effective employee.
Charlie, I have a question for you. So, as you're experiencing these new cultures and stuff, what advice do you have for millennials when they're just getting their feet wet with these new cultures and experiencing that?
So this gets into a little bit of the difference between going to Columbus and Austin and Singapore and Romania and Russia and all these different places that people think about going. And, it gets into kind of outside of your work, outside of your 8 or 10 hours that you're spending at work, what do you do? And I think a really significant piece of advice is to learn about the city that you're in. Let me go a little bit deeper in that. Cities have both deep roots, so they have a really important history, and at the same time, in this era, they're very dynamic. And so don't just go and look at a city and therefore a culture as a static thing. The first thing is learn what the roots are. Go back and think, 100, 200, 300. Depending on where you are in the world, you may have to go back many centuries to really think through what are the roots of a city. I'll give you an example. I had the great fortune in the late 80s. I had a plant and a major business in Bologna, Italy that reported to me. So I had the great fortune of having to go spend 1 week a month in Bologna, which I loved. It ruined my taste for Italian food in America for the next 10 years because no American could make food like they had. But if you go back to the 13th and 14th century, I think, Bologna was one of the educational capitals of the world and built one of the great university systems in the world. Well, that kind of starts to teach you about that city and that culture. In the U.S., if you study the culture of Columbus, Ohio versus in Austin, Texas, you'll find very different influences and very different roots. So, you guys are all fascinated by going to the Austin Music Festival. You ought to think through, why does Austin have a music festival that is so successful? It's so important. It's so much a part of the community. So think through what are the cultural roots. The second piece of this equation is that cities and cultures now, and especially cities or urban areas, are very dynamic. The very things that we're talking about, the whole millennial, the information age, is changing all these cities very rapidly. So think about how that city is changing. Think about how different neighborhoods or different parts of the city are evolving. Some of them are failing, some of them are succeeding. And think through that. Compare the city you're looking at to other cities. Is St. Louis succeeding as well as Chicago? What are the other parts of the world that are maybe pulling or competing well against that city? And get into the momentum or the dynamics of that city. As somebody says, this is a good line for my engineering friends, this is about calculus and not geometry. These are not static, they're dynamic things. And so I think if you'll do that, you will really, really understand the community. And from that, you'll understand the people you're working with. So when you go to work, think about maybe the engineers you're working with who are from different parts of the country. They come from different cultures. They have different ways they do things. You can learn from that. Go engage with the more of the administrative staff, the secretaries or whatever, the lab people. They're more likely to be local people. And they're coming from a different culture. And these are all things that will help you understand what's going on in the work environment and what's going on in the broader area. And you'll start to piece together, where do you fit in this world? Where are you comfortable? Where can you be most effective? And that will influence on maybe where you can you can live. Probably the perfect person is the person who can live in many different places, who sees the richness of every little city and every country and every culture, who can appreciate that maybe it's failing today, but it has deep roots as a culture that will maybe foretell of success in the future. And so these are all things that I think will take people that have great minds like you and allow you to get more out of this experience than just going and working on an engineering problem.